In this section, we're going to talk about the self-study program and how it's constructed, how it works for tax year 2020. First of all, you have an abundance of training materials at your disposal. The first one on the list here, IRS resources, is the linklearncertification.com website. We're going to look at more detail on this, but this is where you're going to go actually to get your certification, and there are links to many of these other sections. So this is a very important web page that you're going to be going back and forth from and to. So good to know this. Form 6674 is the certification test and retest. So there is a test and there is a retest. So if you fail to get 80% correct answers on the test, you have what's called a retest, where you can essentially go through the same scenarios as you did in the test, but there will be different questions than you had on the original test. So the retest is a way to give you a second chance to get your certification if you fail to get it on the first try. Publication 4491 is the training guide. This is a quite substantial document, a book I should say. If it's printed on paper, it's probably a book about 3/4 of an inch thick, maybe even an inch these days, I don't know. So there's quite a bit of information in the 4491 training guide. A lot of illustrations in there. So it's a little bit dry because it is tax law, and some trainees have had problems going through the training guide. And I must admit that there's a lot of redundancy between the training guide and what's called Link and Learn Taxes, which is part of the linklearncertification.com website. So Link Learn Taxes, we're going to talk about more, but that's really more of an interactive way to learn tax law, and probably better designed to keep your interest rather than the training guide. But if you need more information than you get from Link and Learn, the training guide is a good place to go to get more detail. Pub 17, your federal income tax for individuals. Pub 17, during the training, we don't really use Pub 17 a whole lot. Again, this is a resource to go to when you need more information than what you currently get from the training. So if you get into a situation, particularly useful at tax time, you get into a situation where the training that you had really isn't substantial enough to give you all the information that you need. You can always go back to Pub 17 and get more detailed information. Now, the Tax-Aide resources, the resources provided by the National Tax Training Committee, the NTTC. So the Tax-Aide people provide a lot of really, really nice training information and resources. Let's start with the Pub 4012. There is a Pub 4012 produced by the IRS as well, but we have taken the Pub 4012s that the IRS produces and we have enhanced it and included a lot of information that was not there under the IRS version. So we encourage you that if you're going to use the publication 4012, you'll probably have a hard copy of 4012 from the IRS, but the version that we use is online. It has a lot more information, and we recommend that over the IRS version. TaxSlayer Practice Lab, which is the online tax preparation software that we use. That is actually a resource that is provided by the IRS, but we use the Practice Lab exclusively in the training. This is the software that you're going to use to do your practice exercises. The National Tax Training Committee Workbook, NTTC Workbook, has a variety of federally focused practice exercises. So you're going to find that we're going to be dealing with Massachusetts tax law and Massachusetts tax returns later, probably starting in December. We'll be focusing on Massachusetts. But in the meantime, you have the ability to create a Massachusetts tax return in the practice exercises. But Massachusetts oftentimes needs to be adjusted for various reasons. Since you're not going to have that education until later, You can go ahead and create a mass return, but don't be concerned with whether the answer to it is correct or not. That comes later on. So the NTTC online training and videos are also very good. They're available on the volunteer portal, which you will have access to as a volunteer. Even as a trainee, you will have access to the portal and you'll have access to these training videos. I also have pointed you in some cases to these videos on specific topics. There's a Tax-Aide scope manual that the NTTC has created. When the word scope becomes very important with Tax-Aide. There are certain things that are in scope and certain topics that are out of scope. Things that are out of scope, we refer our taxpayers to generally paid tax preparers in order to deal with issues that are out of scope for us. So we'll talk more about scope in a little bit. The Volunteer Resource Guide, publication 4012, which again is, there are two versions, the IRS version and the Tax-Aide version, is written specifically for the VITA TCE program. VITA stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. TCE stands for Tax Counseling for the Elderly. Tax-Aide actually falls under the TCE umbrella, Tax Counseling for the Elderly. The 4012 contains everything that you would ever need to pass the test as far as a resource book could contain. So there's nothing in the test that's not somewhere covered in the 4012. It's available online in October generally, which means that the 2021 version will be coming out sometime this month. But I would suggest that you stick with the 4012 for tax year 2020, because 2020 is really the year that we're going to be training you on up until sometime after Thanksgiving, which is when we'll switch over to 2021. But most of the training that you're going to have is going to be with the 2020 software, because especially the Massachusetts software is not available until usually January. So it's important that we keep you on the 2020 track until we feel comfortable that the 2021 information that is released is reliable, is up to date. So focus on 2020. Tax-Aide always recommends that you use the NTTC modified version. And if you have a chance to look at both, you look at the IRS version 4012 and look at the NTTC modified version, and you will see that the National Tax Training Committee has made just innumerable changes to that document, or additions to the document, to make it more useful to us. And it's very much more useful. So the 4012, the NTC modified version is only available online. There is no printed version of it. The latest version is always available in the volunteer portal, but I also have it, as I told you before, in my self-study folder under federal resources. The latest version always available early November with January updates. So the NTTC version will be available in early November, and again updated in January. And it is your best quick reference tool for Tax-Aide only scope items. So there's a front section in the beginning of the 4012 that talks about what's in scope and what's out of scope. And that varies between the VITA program and the Tax-Aide program. So in the NTTC modified version, you'll actually see a comparison between what's in scope for IRS and what's in scope for VITA and what's in scope for TCE and Tax-Aide. So that's that. Now we're going to take a look at my 2020 self-study folder, which is where you should be focusing your attention for the next several weeks. I have included everything that you could possibly need for training purposes in this folder. And you can see at the top level, down at the bottom, Self-Study Program Release 1. That is the PDF file that you're going to access to actually go through the program. That is kind of the roadmap to everything that you're going to do over the next several weeks. So you need to download that file and have it handy so that you can access it. I've sent out paper copies of it. You should have those by now. The paper copies are useful so that when you do finally get around to doing the exercises, you will not have to have two windows open on your computer screen, especially if you're using a 15-inch laptop. It's very difficult to have two windows open and be able to switch back and forth between the two. So it's a lot easier if you have paper documents on your desk, and that's what the paper version is there for. Now keep in mind, in order for you to access the links to go to various places on the internet, obviously the paper document isn't going to help you with that. So you're going to have to use the online version for going to various links like the IRS Link and Learn places, but we'll get more into that later on. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to download the self-study program, release number 1. And now you can see the folders above that: federal resources, mass resources, the answer key for Massachusetts, practice returns for Massachusetts, the NTTC answer key for the workbook, for the 2020 workbook, NTC practice workbook, and then again, that's for tax year 2020. So we're going to drill down into those folders now. Here you can see the federal resources folder, and you can see what's in here, and you can see that I've circled the NTTC modified 4012 for tax year 20. And that's release 2A. So there was a release 1 at one point, but this is the latest and greatest for 2020. So you can see other resources in here, Pub 17. So I put everything else that you could possibly want in here, but really you're going to spend most of your time with the 4012. And you're right below that is the NTC modified 4491, which the self-study program does point you to. So I have found that some people do just fine with the Link and Learn features and the Link and Learn modules, but other people need the extra reading and the extra level of detail, and you can get that from the 4491. The self-employed COVID worksheet, you're not going to be using that this year, I don't think. It was there from last year, actually. And then the scope manual near the bottom. You might want to take a look at that and see what's in scope and what's not in scope. And then there's also something for the 2019 earned income credit. You don't need to pay any attention to that at this point. And here's your Mass Resources folder. The most important thing here is the Mass Manual. So the state of Massachusetts Tax-Aide people have spent a lot of effort in making this manual available to us. Our district coordinator, Maria, has recently updated the manual. So actually the 20 version may not be updated. So it's a 2021 version, I think, that she has been working on. So I'm not sure whether the 20 is the updated version or not. But anyway, you're going to get all of the information that you need to know about Massachusetts you're going to get from this manual. And I strongly suggest that you don't focus a lot of your attention on Massachusetts tax law at this point. You really need to focus your attention on the federal for the first few weeks, and then we'll get into the Massachusetts in December. So you can see that there are worksheets in this folder. And again, those are used during tax season, but you can take a look at them. You can see exactly why we would have such a worksheet and how it's used in actual production during the tax season. Here is the folder with the 2020 practice returns, which focus a lot of their attention on the Massachusetts aspect. But we actually have been using, last couple of years, have been using these practice returns. We prefer to use them over the returns in the NTTC workbook. So these returns, because they do uh, focus on a lot of Massachusetts topics, we have a tendency to use these more. Ultimately, when you certify, you're going to be expected to do 3 of the intermediate or comprehensive, but I generally recommend intermediate um, tax returns, intermediate level tax returns from this group here. There is an answer key in a different folder that gives you the answer to these problems, but then you need to actually create the return that comes up with that answer. So it sounds easy enough to do, but in some cases it can be challenging. But I would suggest you read at the bottom, read this first, the errata slip. So when these exercises were first created, there were some things that needed to be corrected. They were corrected in this errata document. So rather than go ahead and start working on practice returns without reading the errata, you could get yourself into some problems in not coming up with the right answer. And the reason may be because you didn't read the errata. So I would suggest you do that. So again, I would recommend these practice exercises over the NTTC workbook. However, I see no problem with doing both. You can probably do these first, and then if you want to do more practice, go to the workbook and work on those. You're just not going to encounter the various Massachusetts anomalies that you're going to find in these, and you're going to learn a lot from those anomalies. Here's the folder with the NTTC workbook. And here again, there is an errata for this as well. And I suggest that you read that first before you get involved with any of the practice exercises here. Focus on federal tax. These exercises focus on federal tax law. They give you the ability to create a state return, but again, they don't focus on the anomalies that we often find in Massachusetts tax returns. So the 2020 NTTC workbook, I have sent hard copies of that workbook to all of you because here again, it's easier to have a paper document with the various tax documents that a taxpayer had in the various scenarios. It's easier to input that information from a paper document than it is going back and forth between 2 windows on a laptop. So for your convenience, I sent you the NTTC workbook for 2020. So if you haven't already received it, you will be getting a 2021 version. I suggest you put that aside for later on and really key in on the 2020 version. So there are classroom training exercises which you can ignore because we're not doing classroom training this year. So the practice exercises are really what you want to use. And there are quizzes to quiz your knowledge of federal tax law. I will be using those quizzes and some of my own when I mentor my trainees. I will be quizzing them on a weekly basis as far as what they've learned in their reading and in their studying. It's also available, actually all of these documents are also available in the volunteer portal in the red training folder. And the self-study program is also available in the volunteer portal in the red training folder. The self-study program is going to provide step-by-step instructions for learning federal tax law and associated tax return preparation for tax year 2020. What's nice about the self-study program for people that are just getting into this tax preparation thing for the first time, there are short, simple tax returns that focus on a single tax law topic at one time. So you're not going to be initially creating a very complicated tax return where one thing has an impact on something else. Each topic that you go through in the self-study program is going to have an exercise that requires you to provide a tax return that really has 1 or 2 documents in it, and it's very simple to keep track of. What I would suggest, well, actually, I will go over this when I give you a demonstration of the program. I'll talk in more detail about that. Publication 6744 from the IRS is the booklet that contains your volunteer assisters test and retest scenarios and documents. And so it's a paper booklet. Uh, the final test that you're going to take is going to be an online test, but the same test is in the paper booklet that's online. It's just that we need the online test in order to record your progress. So the paper copy is mailed to all of the volunteers. You should be getting that soon. Counselors are required to pass 3 tests with 80 or better correct answers. The volunteer standards of conduct test also has to be taken. The intake and interview test has to be taken, and the advanced exam, which is the advanced exam is the big test that has the various tax scenarios, and certainly the most difficult of the 3. The first 2 are actually pretty straightforward and very much common sense related. So we've had people that have actually passed test 1 and 2 just through common sense without having read any of the material. But there are a couple of questions that do require that you do some reading. But you could probably still get 80% correct even if you didn't. The advanced exam, of course, you're going to have to do a lot of preparation for. Pay close attention to the wording on the advanced exam. It can be a little bit tricky. You'll find that 80% of the questions are pretty straightforward, but the other 20% have a significant number of tricky questions. So really pay close attention to the wording, and don't ever assume that you necessarily got a question correct, because you may find that it wasn't correct. So be careful. So the test and retest, they use the same scenarios. So the test and retest uses exactly the same scenarios, but they have different questions than the test. So if you have to do the test over again and take the retest, you'll find the scenarios are exactly the same, but the questions are different. We strongly recommend doing both the test and the retest on paper prior to actually entering the final answers on the LinkLearn certification website. So it's a good practice for you. You'll find that when you get to the online version, you'll be much better prepared. And if you do the test and the retest, you'll find that questions are being asked from a different perspective. And oftentimes you will find that you may have misunderstood the test question, but that understanding becomes much more clear when you take the retest. So even though it's time consuming, obviously, to take both tests on paper, it's going to probably work in your favor as far as getting a more favorable score on the test. So I recommend that you do that. Beware of tricky questions. I think I've already made that point clear. Here is the page that you're going to see when you go to linklearncertification.com. VITA TCE Central. Here is kind of a source for you to go to lots of different places. The first thing you're going to do, however, is you're going to create an account on the left-hand side. Set up a new IRS account. If you don't already have one, some of you have been with the program before and may already have an account. And if you don't have the password for that account any longer, there's nothing wrong with creating a new account. You can certainly do that. But you can see that there's a login on the left-hand side. And but you can also do forgot your password. So if you did forget your password and you have an account that you created from before, you can click here if you forgot your password, and they'll give you a procedure for creating a new password. So you can see instructor tools, which you're not going to care too much about, but over on the right, quick links. So you have Link and Learn lessons. We're going to talk more about Link and Learn, but you can access those from there. You can get the test and retest PDFs, so that PDF version of the paper copy that you're going to receive in the mail is also available when you click on certification test retest PDFs. VITA TCE training guide, evaluations, practice lab. You can get to the practice lab from here. So you can get to Tax-Slayer from here. And VSOC is Volunteer Standards of Conduct. So the information that you need to read for Volunteer Standards of Conduct and the intake interview are both listed over on the right-hand side, where you can prepare for those tests by reading those documents.